Irene hits New York City. Irene weakened to a tropical storm Sunday, but the huge weather system remained dangerous as it raced across a shuttered New York City, leaving behind a stunned U.S. East Coast where at least 15 people were taken. Severe flooding was widespread, and 4 million homes and businesses lost power. Further north in New England, residents were bracing for extreme flooding and winds that could topple many towering trees that sat in soil already saturated by earlier heavy rains. The storm was expected to move over eastern Canada by Sunday night. Forecasters said Irene, while diminished in strength, was still massive and powerful, carrying sustained winds of 60 miles per hour after its long journey up the east coast, where it dropped at least a foot of rain on North Carolina and Virginia. The National Hurricane Center downgraded the storm after its winds fell below 74 miles per hour, the threshold for a hurricane. As the eye of the sprawling storm blew through America's largest city and Long Island to the east, it pushed an 8-foot Atlantic storm surge toward New York and sent salty floodwater flowing into lower Manhattan. As of 10:30 a.m., at least 750,000 people in New York were without power. The Homeland Security Secretary said President Barack Obama was briefed Sunday morning and instructed administration officials to continue to be aggressive in their efforts to deal with the storm and its aftermath. She said the worst of the storm has passed for most areas, but she cautioned communities still in Irene's path should continue to be vigilant, even though the storm had weakened. She told a news conference that pre-storm preparations dramatically reduced the loss of life, but warned that river flooding across the eastern seaboard continued to pose hazards for the public. At least 65 million people affected. Forecasters said early Sunday that Irene was moving to the north-northeast at 26 miles per hour as it pushed toward New England. Officials also warned that isolated tornadoes were possible in the northeast. The huge storm had threatened 65 million people up and down the Atlantic coast, estimated as the largest number of Americans ever affected by a single storm. New York City was eerily quiet. In a city where many people don't own cars, the population stayed indoors. The entire transit system was shut down because of weather for the first time ever. All of the city's airports are closed. Broadway shows, baseball games, and other events were all canceled or postponed. Mayor Michael Bloomberg had warned New York's millions of residents they needed to avoid or evacuate low-lying areas. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie said in an interview that the storm covered half of the state and 250 roads were closed due to flooding and downed trees. He also expects damages from Irene to be costly along the Atlantic coast and from inland river flooding. I've got to imagine that the damage estimates are going to be in the billions of dollars, if not in the tens of billions of dollars, Christie said. Salt water from New York Harbor submerged parts of a promenade at the base of Manhattan. A foot of water rushed over the wall of a marina in front of the New York Mercantile Exchange, where gold and oil are traded. As the center of the storm passed over Central Park at mid-morning, floodwater reached the wheel wells of some stranded cars in Manhattan, and more streamed into the streets of Queens. Still, the storm didn't come close to inflicting the kind of catastrophic damage that had been feared in the city. The September 11th Museum, a centerpiece of the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site, said on Twitter that none of its memorial trees were lost. Forecasters had said there was a chance a storm surge on the fringes of lower Manhattan along New York Harbor could send seawater streaming into the maze of underground vaults that hold the city's cables and pipes, knocking out power to thousands and crippling the city. Officials feared water would slosh into Wall Street, the ground zero location of the former Twin Towers, and the luxury, high-rise apartments of Battery Park City. Battery Park City, in the extreme south of Manhattan Island, was virtually deserted as rain and gusty winds pummeled streets and whipped trees. Officials were bracing for a storm surge of several feet that could flood or submerge the promenade along the Hudson River. On Wall Street, sandbags were placed around subway grates near the East River because of fear of flooding. In Times Square, shops boarded up windows and sandbags were stacked outside of stores. Construction at the World Trade Center site came to a standstill. New York has seen only a few hurricanes in the past 200 years. The Northeast is much more accustomed to snowstorms, including a blizzard last December when Mayor Michael Bloomberg was criticized for a slow city response. Irene made landfall just after dawn Saturday near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, at the southern end of the Outer Banks. Shorefront hotels and houses were lashed with waves. 2 piers were destroyed, and at least 1 hospital was forced to run on generator power. All 3 New York airports remained effectively closed Sunday morning. More than 10,000 flights have been canceled through Monday, according to FlightAware. That includes some 6,600 on Sunday alone. The number of airline passengers affected by the storm could easily be in the millions because so many flights make connections on the East Coast. Irene caused flooding from North Carolina to Delaware, both from the 7-foot waves it pushed into the coast and from heavy rain. More than 1 million of the homes and businesses without power were in Virginia and North Carolina, which bore the brunt of Irene's initial fury. Then, the storm knocked out power overnight to hundreds of thousands in Washington, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, the New York City area, and Connecticut. Irene was the first hurricane to make landfall in the continental United States since 2008, and came 6 years later, minus 1 day after Hurricane Katrina ravaged the Gulf Coast. Again, these are more warning signs of the end times, transition days, which is a time of extraordinary events, happenings, and changes. Everything is connected, and everything is numbered. It's also called destiny or fate, and it's all about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. 26. Humans' hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. 27. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. 28. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. Revelation chapter 11, verse 16. And the 24 elders, which sat before God in their seats, fell upon their faces, and worshipped God. 17. Saying, We give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which are, and was, and are to come, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power, and hast reigned. 18. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou should give reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. 19. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings, and voices, and thunderings, and an earthquake, and great hail. It's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled right now. Watch the weather changes.